We all heard it before, setting boundaries. But what does that really mean? And when should we be setting them? If you have these questions, then you're in the right place. Because in this video, we're gonna cover 6 actionable steps that you can take to properly set boundaries with people in your life that may have irked you for some time. Before we get into the steps, it's important to understand what boundaries are and why they are important. A boundary is a limit or rule that you set for yourself to define what is and what isn't acceptable. It's an imaginary line that you create to let others know how they should treat you. Think of it like a boundary of a property. If someone trespasses, then you need to enforce that boundary by telling them to get off your property. If you don't, then you might be letting people take advantage of you, maybe walking all over your property, entering your house, making you feel unsafe and uncomfortable. So setting boundaries helps protect you. It also lets other people know how they should behave around you, and it can avoid future misunderstandings and conflict. Now that we have defined what boundaries are, how do we set them? First and foremost, you have to do your homework. That means taking the time to think about what behaviors you're willing to accept and what you won't. For example, let's say your mom keeps showing up to your house unannounced, and you're starting to get irritated over time because every single time she invites herself over, she's disrupting your plans. So you want to set a boundary. But what is the specific boundary? Is it for her to show up less frequently? Is it for her to call before she comes over? Or is it that you want her to ask for permission? Doing your homework means figuring out which specific boundary you want for yourself. And one way to do that is to figure out your whys. So ask yourself, why is this behavior bothering you? Whatever the case may be, you want to accurately define why that behavior bothers you, so you can better understand what boundary needs to be put in place in order to resolve the issue. So after you do your homework and you have a better understanding of what your boundary will be, what's next? Setting up the meeting. It's important to set up a time and place where both you and the person you're trying to set boundaries with can speak with no distractions. This is important because you want to effectively communicate during this conversation. That can't happen if you're at a coffee shop, on your way to work, or at the gym. You want everyone who's part of this conversation to give their undivided attention so that they can take this seriously. So pick a time and place where this can happen. Then at the scheduled meeting, you want to set the right tone. Don't go immediately into it by accusing them of the problem behavior. That will likely make them defensive and unwilling to listen. Instead, you might want to start off with a positive statement about them. By doing this, they're more likely to lower their defenses and become more receptive to the follow-up criticism you have. After you make a positive statement, then you want to identify the specific problem behavior, and then you want to end it with another positive statement. Now, here's an example of how this conversation might play out. Mom, I really love how close of a relationship we have, and I really appreciate everything that you have done for me. But there's been something on my mind that has been really bothering me, and I really want to share that with you. When you come over to my house unannounced, it makes me feel uncomfortable because it makes me feel like I don't have any privacy. I'm sure you mean well, and I know it's not coming from a negative place, but I really wanted to bring it up to you so you know how it's been making me feel. After you let them know how their behavior affects you, the next step is to ask them why they engage in that behavior in the first place. Don't skip this step. You might be tempted to go straight into telling them about the boundary, but you're actually missing out on an important opportunity. In order to have effective communication, you need to approach the conversation with an open mind. Remember, this is a dialogue. It's not a lecture. If they feel like this is a lecture, they'll be less likely to want to hear what you have to say. So be willing to approach the conversation to listen to their perspective as well. Because even if you think that you know why they're engaging in that behavior, you want to still give them the chance to explain where they're coming from. For all you know, this may have been a misunderstanding, or simply they just weren't aware they were engaging in that behavior in the first place. Whatever the case may be, they'll feel heard and respected when you're giving them a chance to explain where they're coming from, and this will make them more willing to respect your decisions moving forward. So after you hear their perspective, see if anything changes. They might have provided something that you haven't yet considered before. So give yourself a little time to consider their perspective because that might affect the boundary you wanted to set. If you decide that you still need to stick with your boundary, then you want to thank them for sharing their perspective and let them know that you're still asking for a change. Then identify the specific boundary you're advocating for. For example, you might say, "Thank you for sharing. I understand where you're coming from, but moving forward, can you give me a call before you make plans to stop by? Is that something you can do for me?" Remember, be as specific as you can about the boundary so everyone knows exactly what they can and cannot do. This last step is going to be one of the hardest ones for you to implement, but don't lose hope because you're almost there. And this step is essentially never let it slide and be consistent. So why is this step the hardest to implement? Because it means that you have to implement a consequence each and every time they overstep their boundary. Just like a property owner who deals with a trespasser, you'll need to have those consequences ready. And those consequences can vary depending on the issue. So for the example we've been talking about telling your mom to call you before she comes over, if she doesn't do it, then the consequence could be you not letting her into the home. It may sound harsh, but none of this is to punish. This consequence is critical because it's a behavioral cue to let them know that they violated your boundaries and it has consequences. If you implement the consequence every time they overstep their boundary, then they're more likely going to respect your boundary moving forward. Sometimes it might take a while for them to adopt your boundaries. They might either forget it or ignore it, or even they might think to themselves, this is a phase and she'll get over it. In any case, don't let anything slide. You need to be consistent with what you say, because this is the only thing that can instill a new pattern moving forward. So anytime they cross your boundary, be firm and remind them what you both agreed upon. Remember, if you don't stand up for what you fought for, neither will they. I hope this video helped you feel more prepared for the next time you want to set healthy boundaries with anyone in your life. And if you like this video and want to see more, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out if you want to share this video with others as well. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.